All right.
Hello.
131.
Yep.
Podcast 131.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome.
So today's topic is Lord of the Rings, eh?
Yeah.
In actuality, Lord of the Rings is one of the
Things we'll bring up. Yeah.
hotly contested things before this. We're just making sure that yes, if we do mention Yang Wenli, Nasubi, that we make point of saying, well, he hasn't really had his moment yet.
Indeed.
So, yeah.
Yeah, because complications.
Yes, complications indeed. Back into my hole then. I'll meet you. Oh my god. Hey, Tanya. Welcome. Observer Matthew.
Hi.
Welcome. All right.
Oh, dang, it's 3 a.m. over there.
Yeah.
Boy. Oh, boy.
12 hours ahead. Wow. You would have to be like basically like on the other side of the world then. That's it's a serious distance there. Ronson, hey. You have a schedule for the VOD channel? Just masking because the One Piece VODs might die on Twitch. Oh, we're recording them. Don't worry.
Yeah.
They just get dumped on an inconsistent amount there. So
right.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. 131. The Pito and Gon podcast. Oh, why didn't even I think about that? Yeah, except Gon is nothing like a reluctant protagonist.
Yeah, he's not. He doesn't take the spotlight just because he's the main character. But oh no, he is so driven. He is like, I'd be interested to see points pointed out where he is actually reluctant.
Yeah, in some ways, I would say one of the big things that we'll be discussing here that could lead to, I would say, a lot of good interaction with you guys in chat is actually whether or not the reluctant protagonist has as much place in storytelling nowadays. Have we run that trope kind of dry as far as mainstream stories go?
And certainly as far as anime goes, because like I was coming up with a list, of some of my favorite like reluctant hero moments and examples and things like that.
Yep.
Man, I had so many for like Western, stories and whatnot.
Yeah.
But as far as anime, not nearly as much as I would have thought.
Right. And the reason for that is primarily that Japan in the anime kind of stories and what have you, very clearly in the first act, if you will, of the story, like really early, will basically make the point of, look at this reluctant protagonist. They are so reluctant and pathetic and just sad. And now, bam, we're going to give them a huge moment that basically shifts their focus here. Now, and that's a bit over-dramatic. But...
Right. Sometimes that reluctance is relegated to 3 minutes of backstory, that's in episode 20 or something. But, that is a thing. Oftentimes, especially in, because maybe it's because of the demographic. I don't know. But, the protagonists in anime will be a lot more driven because, they can give those loud yells and things like that, right? Whereas, in the West, you'll have a lot more of, the sort of the brooding warrior kind of a thing, where they have a past. Maybe they need redemption of some kind or something along those lines.
Yeah, in Western kind of live-action stuff, especially the more adult you go, because this is one of the things I would say is rather common with live-action stuff specifically, is you have kind of the middle-aged white guy that's just kind of everything's just kind of, it just kind of sucks in general. It's John McClane, literally, from Die Hard, basically. Yeah. Just another job, John. What are you going to be?
Have a few drinks, have a few laughs. What could go wrong? And the whole thing that made Die Hard as a movie was basically the reluctance of the protagonist, right? That he was out of his element and he was complaining and making jokes to himself the entire time. Right? Without that, it's kind of just another action flick with a bit of heart.
Yeah, and in some ways you can see... Also, because of Western live-action stuff, the forcing in of reluctant protagonists when they weren't even like that from the source material, as in Aragorn from Lord of the Rings.
Aragorn in the books is completely different from the movies. Like in the books, he's a badass. He's still the ranger and all that stuff, but you get the feeling that he was being a ranger more for just to stay in hiding because that's what was needed.
Because that's what it was needed,
right? Don't put a target on your back. But then as soon as it's oh yeah, we're gonna set out. He's like, all right, Elrond, on the road, reforge it. We need that shit. We're going places. Whereas in the movies, they turn it into a much less mythical kind of hero.
Right. And this is, I would say, where we're going to be drawing a lot of the inspiration from with regards to this discussion, is this kind of comes from a mythic origin where you have the character who needs to be pulled in some ways, literally forced into the story via some kind of circumstance or persons in their environment. So we'll be getting into this here. But before we go too in depth, we've got to give a VIP shout out to $29.90. Thank you so much for the VIP support. Means a lot.
Thank you.
And hoping to see you in the Discord. Check us out in the VIP channel there.
Ah, yes. Shinji getting the damn robot. Yeah. No, that's
we have a special spot for Shinji on this podcast. Don't worry. We'll get to Mr. Boy Akari.
But that's one of the great examples of where a reluctant protagonist, now granted that was done in a very specific way, but where it wasn't received as well.
Sure.
Right? In an anime situation. And I feel like maybe it comes down to the fact that a lot of the times the anime revolve around sort of coming of age stories.
Well, it's a way to make the characters more relatable, basically.
Right, yeah, exactly.
You can insert yourself into this protagonist, right?
Right, but you don't. Well, okay. Insert.
Kinda.
I mean, we might need to agree to disagree on that one, because I really like when reluctant protagonists are done. They are done badly in certain circumstances, but
right. I'm meaning more of the character where they don't have a motivation.
Well, oh yeah, and that's one of the big things. A lot of the time, especially with older stories, when you have a reluctant protagonist, they keep them reluctant in a way, and then they don't have a motivation because you slaughter their whole village, you do the Luke thing, they're right, so that they have no reason to stay, and they're forced into it, and that's fine to start with. But if you do that, you want to then have a follow-up moment where they actively choose it for themselves, right? Where now they're not the reluctant protagonist anymore, because the reluctant protagonist is, as Shinji displays, not something that audiences usually want to see as a constant state of being.
Yes.
Right? It's so that you can get out of that, and when you get out of that, it's worthwhile because you've seen them, for sometimes a long time in that state where they aren't willing to actually do the thing.
For sure. There's a lot of characters out there where you see them in their, they're getting forced. Okay, here we go. There's one of my favorite anime out there, Gurren Lagann, has an exceptional instance of a reluctant protagonist in Simone, to the point where you're not even sure he's the main protagonist for the beginning of the story. But there comes a specific moment where, after he's been forced constantly into this crazy, wacky antics of a story, and then things change, and he has to choose it himself.
Right.
And there are some really powerful emotions that come from him choosing who he is going to be in the story. Yeah.
And for the kind of show that Gurren Lagann is, given that it's such a coming of age story and everything, that whole idea it fits perfectly. I know a lot of people are kind of bothered by early Simone, because they're like, well, he's just a little kid, and it's like, yes, that's exactly the point. Right. And you have all the other characters for the awesome, bravado and everything, but then there comes the point where he has to put on the mantle. He has to pick himself up and decide that, he's not his brother.
Yeah.
He's him. Yeah. Simone the Digger.
And that's the point that we're talking about, not the finale of the show. We're talking about his speech, his manly speech of, this is who I am.
Right. His
and
first Giga Drill
it
break.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. The first Giga Drill break, and everyone's like, oh my God. That is his moment, and things completely change there in a really powerful way. We're going to be talking about a lot of, I would say, kind of specific kind of tropes that are used to kind of set up the reluctant hero dynamic here, and there's a bunch of them that kind of tend to go in specific ways, but there are a lot of different angles with which they can do it there. So one of them is you basically have the redemption story, where it's not that they're actually a protagonist for the good guys necessarily, but they are a driving force in their story, but they have a reluctance towards becoming a protagonist. So this works in some ways for characters there. It's like they're not really the best kind of help for the good guys here necessarily, but they're also not the main antagonist. They're not like the
Yeah, they're on their own journey.
They're on their own journey.
And
exactly.
and this bypasses like redemption stories. I feel like are very often just like not given the proper attention as the reluctant hero kind of deal in storytelling because it's not as obvious, right?
Right.
But it's in a lot of ways it's an incredible way to get around the Simone problem.
Yep.
Because that's fine. You don't necessarily have to see them being say whiny. It's because it's not necessarily a coming of age story. It's more of them discovering who they really are rather than growing up, right? And so you can have them fulfill some other role in the story, maybe as antagonist to another character, right? But they are still on their own journey, and then eventually there comes the point where they have their moment, and their moment of redemption, or the decision for that, embarking on that path of redemption is usually the equivalent of their I am now starting my hero's journey, even if it doesn't last long.
Right. One of the ones that I think you all are expecting me to say, I'm going to save for a little bit here because I think it's the best example of this. But I think there's one that kind of goes into a little bit of an obvious bit with regards to the idea of what the moment is. But actually, as a character, you kind of realize, oh, right, Tsukishima from Haikyuu is kind of antagonistic towards Hinata.
Yep.
There's an aspect of him where he's very much not a fan of this squawking wild sunchild that's constantly, making all kinds of noise and stuff. And you also can tell that he is not really as excited or driven with regards to volleyball.
Sure.
But over the course of seasons 1 and 2, you start to see, there's actually a little bit of that reluctance coming out in a specific way.
Right.
In that he feels almost pushed to do this volleyball thing a little bit more seriously because, well, Hinata is also taking it really seriously, and now he's kind of needing to do this.
Yeah.
Yamaguchi has a really cool confrontation moment with him in season 2 like this, where he's basically foreshadowing the moment. Like, aren't you going to take this seriously? And then you have all the senpais from the other teams, coming in and having their moment of like, hey, we can see what's going on here. You have potential to do this, but you've got to choose this.
Right.
Now, it might not be something that you're really interested in choosing right now, but I'll tell you, if you stick at this, you're going to have a moment.
Right.
And I love that they literally boil it down to Tsukishima having a moment in 3-4, and it's the most brilliant, just, as he just crows, yes, pun intended, with excitement that he blocked Ushijima there. But it was really season 2. It was the journey that happened through season 2, where you realize, oh, okay, he is shifting to becoming an active protagonist. He is actively increasing his skills in volleyball, and he starts to not, accept Hinata, but he starts to tone it back a little bit with Hinata because he's focusing on his own thing now.
Right.
So,
another favorite one of mine that, if you think about it, like, okay, and yes, as soon as redemption stories are brought up, of course I'm going to mention A Silent Voice, right?
Yep.
I'm going to do it. But really, like, if we look at the main character Ishida, right, in A Silent Voice, he is reluctant at the beginning because there's this idea, there's this offering that's repeatedly being made of, do you want to be friends, right? And he is very reluctant about it. He is not accepting of that in the slightest.
Yep.
And then there comes a point where he is forced to basically rethink his ways, right? Forced out of his current environment. Everyone turns on him, right? And okay, that's one thing. But you couldn't just have him go on a redemption story or go on a now a hero's journey just because of that. There needs to come a point where he actually chooses it. And now it's all done in like the first, 15, 20 minutes of the movie. But then there's the point where he's like, okay, I think I'm going to kill myself, right? And then he's like, wait a minute. Maybe there's something I need to do first. Maybe there's something I need to set right. And then there you go. He has his moment. And then the whole rest of the story, now he's on his way, right?
Right.
Because I feel like the reluctant hero trope, right? Because it's a building block. Tropes are building blocks. And you can use them. They're good. But you want to know why you're using them. And you don't want your audience to get exhausted from the building block, right? And I feel like if it can be disguised as something else, then you can still keep the power because people can subconsciously recognize it, right?
Yes.
But it doesn't go into their conscious mind. So they don't go, oh, okay, now we need to, wait for the person to actually stop, whining or whatever, right? Even though I don't agree with a lot of the whining sentiment that people have for Simone, but, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I would say, specific types of characters like that in anime. I would say Shinji Ikari is one that we're not doing immediately here in terms of discussion, but he is one of the ones in which that type of character archetype in anime is popularized because of that. There are a lot of characters like that, and Shinji Ikari is from one of the most legendary anime of all time in terms of notoriety, specifically for Japan. So doing a little bit of an iteration twist on Shinji Ikari makes a lot of sense. There's a couple other iterations of this, but I kind of want to get into the one that happened rather recently as far as a redemption story. This is one for a side character. This is one for a side character in an anime that, for the most part, there's not really a lot of direct antagonism towards our main cast, but there is some aspect of them based on something that they did in the past,
right?
That is quite antagonistic. And that's our big daddy boy Endeavor. Endeavor from My Hero Academia recently had his moment. And it was not so specific of an instance in time. It was something we just got to watch. It was a spectacle.
Yes.
It was a progression from way back in season 3, and even in some ways, well, not really season 2, more season 3. But then we get to see that he is proving this to his son here. But it was not really just Endeavor's moment there. It was that we got to see Todoroki, our boy Shoto, actually having a moment as he's bearing the weight of what's happening in front of him here. And it was effective.
One of the things that was effective. Again, like I talked about disguising the reluctant hero bit, especially for the moment. And with Endeavor, they really did that well, because there's the fact that he's antagonistic, right? Even if not like a direct villain, but he's antagonistic, so you're not expecting this, right? And then there's the point where you start to expect something because he's the number one hero now, and you know that he's wrestling with that. He needs to reconcile something deep within him. But you don't know exactly what he's going to do. You don't know what that's going to look like. And then from the point where we actually realize what he's going for to the point where we get the moment, it's a very short amount of time, and yet then we realize there's kind of been buildup
of his reluctance.
This entire
along.
Time.
So that's
and then it comes as a surprise, and at the same time it delivers on the hype that we didn't even realize was necessarily there.
Right. And this is something that I would say to those of you, because I would say, Cyclona, you're kind of right in that Endeavor is not really a reluctant protagonist. He has aspects of that, but the main aspect of his reluctance comes in the fact that when All Might is no longer the number one hero, no longer the symbol of peace, there is that little bit of reluctance within him to actively seek out that spot. The thing that he has been working for so long is now right in front of him. And the show chooses to wait a good portion of time before showing him step into that role, because he's not necessarily ready for it. Because this came all of a sudden to him, and it also didn't come in a way that he wanted. When we see him actively dealing with the loss of All Might in season 3, we see him upset. He's distraught. He's in like a home gym kind of thing. And he's got his tank top on, and he's trashed it, and he's angry. So we're like, oh, there's something going on here.
Because yes, Endeavor is not reluctant. He's in fact very decisive, very driven. But the problem is his entire world has been based around the way that he does things. So suddenly that's not enough anymore. And if you have a hammer that's really good at being a hammer, but all of a sudden you need a paintbrush. If you're used to constantly just using that hammer, and you're like, I don't know, that china kind of looks like a nail to me right now. There will be some built up reluctance to actually put down the hammer and pick up the paintbrush. And that's something that I think Endeavor does in a really cool way, because, he isn't reluctant in the traditional sense, in that helps hide it.
And I would say that I'm probably going to be proven right in some ways. The situation in the Prominence Burn episode is one that he's kind of forced into, even though he also was slightly, only a little bit, slightly forced into the situation on stage to say, watch me. That was his choice for the most part there. But it was something where he was set up to kind of have to say something impactful by Hawks. Then, in the moment at the skyscraper and stuff, he was attacked by the Nomu, and it seemed a little bit forced. It seemed a little bit like, specific. So I guess we'll have to wait for season 5 for that kind of stuff there. But it was one where he was basically given the platform for it, but it wasn't his choice to do it then and there.
Right. And one of the other aspects to it, too, is that it's not just the fighting. It's not just the being the number one hero. It's also being a dad. Now, his reluctance is as a result of the forced aspect of the reluctance is as a result of his own actions. Because of how he treated his family and Todoroki especially, right? But after that point, he is now in a situation where he is forced out of a relationship, but to not be able to have a relationship with Todoroki, right?
Right.
Because
he has to
of
deal
the things
with those
that he's done.
consequences.
He's got to deal with the consequences of the things he's done, right?
Yep.
So now, because of that, right, he is in this situation where it doesn't work, right? That relationship is not there.
Nope.
But then he chooses to try and do what he can in order to fix it.
Right.
And then it's displayed wonderfully with the Prominence Burn and all of that stuff. And the flowers and everything that he sends to his wife.
Yeah, so that is our one for my hero. Now we're going to get to the one y'all were specifically waiting for.
Yeah.
The one that is the one that we have to mention because this is one of the best examples of this type of character development in general. And that is our boy Zuko. The other scarred boy. And the scar is not on the wrong side.
Right. This is potentially the longest example of the forced moment into the chosen moment that I've ever seen, right? Because the forced moment is before the show even starts, right? We get it in the backstory, right? And then we have to wait 2.5 full seasons to the point where he actually has his choosing moment, right? Like that's crazy. As far as actual like gambles for like screen time and stuff, that's a big deal. But because it's handled so well along the way, because he fits into the story as an antagonist, but then also as he's wrestling with his internals and everything, and he has Iroh there with him. You're along there with him for the journey, so that when he has those moments, because he has one in season 2, and then goes back on it. You're cheering for him. You are absolutely cheering for him.
Right. And we're specifically talking about right now the characters that the things that led to their moment of being a more reluctant protagonist to being basically a protagonist is the redemption story specifically right now. Yes, Aang is a great example of a reluctant protagonist continually being reluctant. And there's a lot of themes specifically that he gets into as to why he's reluctant, and it was very much a forced setup that he was put into because he was born as the Avatar, basically. He ended up being pushed in a specific situation because of the coming war.
And then his people are gone.
So there's great forcing functions specifically upon which he needs to then address the conflict and take some measure of responsibility. But he's not one that I feel like I'd want to draw like a ton of special attention to. Because he kind of fits the mold almost like too cookie cutter in specific ways. And also we don't really get a big singular moment that's built up to as to when he takes responsibility and stops being a reluctant hero.
That's what I would say is the big thing for Aang. Is that because he does the reluctant hero thing very well. The idea of him just being a kid and all that stuff, and he has to deal with this. Yes, awesome. But there isn't like that crystal like just right there. This is when it happens.
Right.
So thank you. I can't remember who it was that reminded me of this, but I totally forgot about one of my favorite series. If you don't mind me going on that little bit of a detour. Haruhi. So Kyon, main character in Haruhi, he is about as reluctant as you can get. He is constantly being snarky and just making his offhand comments of why do I have to put up with all this and stuff, right?
Right.
And then the disappearance movie happens, right?
Yeah.
And suddenly he is forced. Well, he was forced into one situation. Now he's forced into another, right? Where he's forced back into his old situation, and then he has to now the whole movie is basically just him realizing that he has to choose. Given that I'm not being forced anymore, I was forced into one and forced into the other. Which one do I want?
Right.
What is it that I actually want deep down inside? Mm-hmm. And it has a wonderful, crystal clear, definitive moment in the movie which is just absolutely wonderful, and I love it so much, where he then decides what it is he really wants.
Yeah. I think if anything, we can kind of skip this one.
Okay.
It doesn't really have as much relevance, this one here.
Sure.
But how about this one? Because there's a character I can think of that goes quite well in this one here that we didn't bring up.
So, one thing I would just recommend in general, if you're ever interested in this kind of stuff we're about to talk about, tvtropes.net, go on like an exploration there. But there are archetypes, especially in like Western stories, where you can see the reluctant hero very clearly, right?
Right, it's very
where
obvious.
It fits especially well. One of them is the grizzled warrior.
Yep.
Whether that's in like Sword of the Stranger, where Nanashi, Nanashi,
Yeah.
where
or in more recent stuff that we've gotten into, specifically the manga of Berserk.
Oh, sure.
Berserk is a great example, with Guts having been a very, very forced into specific situations type of protagonist. He has had the whole freaking world against him constantly. Mm-hmm. And yet he has multiple steps that he basically takes to go, okay, I'm going to be taking my protagonist step here. I'm going to take my protagonist step here. Joining the Band of the Hawk. Having his moment where he kind of realizes, oh, I'm going to strike off from the Band of the Hawk.
Because I guess I haven't really thought about what I want before, but I'm going to go actively find out. You know?
Yeah, I love the moment where him and Griffith duel in the snow.
Oh, yeah.
And you realize that this is him changing his entire direction from being a reluctant protagonist to being an active one where he chooses his own fate and destiny. And holy crap, he changes the fate and destiny of almost the entire world because of that decision. The ripple effects of that shown in the manga story in general are just crazy.
And there can be a lot of overlap with these kinds of like tropes and things. So like the Grizzled Warrior can oftentimes also be the redemption story. That's what Nanashi in Sword of the Stranger was, and it was done very well. There's also there's also the anti-hero thing, right? Where it's they don't actually want to like say help these people, but from some extenuating circumstances they end up being convinced to do it, and then beyond just maybe the money, like in like Han Solo or something.
Han Solo is a great example.
Han Solo is a classic example where eventually he has the decision to come back, and that's one of the reasons why people are so upset about did Greedo shoot first or Han shoot first? Because if Han shot first, then he truly is mercenary, right? His morality is not the best, right? So that means it's an actual decision that is contrary to his previous nature to come back at the end of
versus him reacting to basically just oh no, he shot me, I shot back.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. But we're not going to get into whole Star Wars things there. But the big, I would say, the big foundational thing that you'll see in almost every kind of reluctant protagonist kind of situation is where there's a moment or sequence of moments that are forced, where the environment basically conspires against them to push them to where they only have one path available.
Right.
There are a lot of ways this happened. Like you joked about the village being burned down.
Yeah.
That is a very common one that is almost now a level of a meme for shonen protagonists. Or in some ways shonen villains also as well.
and it's been done so much that people don't want to touch that almost with like a 39.5-foot pole because everyone knows that it doesn't have the same impact anymore, right? Whereas, but if you disguise it with things like if it's actually a redemption story at the same time, then you can get around that a bit better.
Right, or if it's not necessarily about their whole necessarily environment being taken away, but maybe there was something that was given to them in the environment really recently in the beginning of the story.
Yeah.
And then very quickly it gets taken away. And you're like, hey, chase the thing that just got taken away. In actually one of our first anime, there was a very good instance of this in Bleach.
Yes.
Believe it or not.
Yeah, you heard that right.
Yep. One of the decently better examples of the reluctant protagonist.
Yeah.
unfortunately is in an anime I can't stand anymore, but that is the fact that when Rukia comes into the story, she is not really like, you know, basically like giving Ichigo a lot of choice there. Right. She does be like, save me, and it is
and save your family, you know, and then there's the immediate choice that has to happen.
So that is his choice.
Right. But he didn't really choose it. He was forced into it. And then in the next episode, it's now because you were forced to choose this thing, you'll help everybody.
You have a duty.
You have a duty. And even though he doesn't necessarily stick to it in later parts, he's like, nah, I don't need to do that. I'll do whatever I want. Right. And as far as that to then combine with the later example of when Rukia gets taken away, then suddenly the idea of him going to rescue her because they had spent, 12 or 15 episodes developing their friendship, then suddenly it means something. Yeah. Then suddenly it's like, okay, this is actual growth for the character. Crazy to think that happens in Bleach, but, it did happen at one point, right? And that's also why the later times when they repeat the same arc, it doesn't have nearly the same weight because it's not growth for Ichigo.
Nope.
No, it's just
repeating a formula.
Yeah, I'd do this for anybody.
Really?
Okay.
Really, dude? Okay. Sure. No, we're not going to rant about Bleach. We're not going to have a Bleach podcast here. But I just wanted to bring it up as guys, this is the reason why I think a lot of people got into Bleach is that the immediate beginning stuff had that cool, fun, quirky, campy aspect to it.
Right.
And then when things, shit got real and Rukia just got kidnapped by some gods with, the ability to teleport with their swords and stuff, you're like, hey, that's our Rukia.
Yeah,
and we're going to go get her. Yep. Will it work? Oh, I don't know. But, I guess we're doing this.
Right.
It is something that needs to be addressed when you see the formula done in a way that works. Because the formula, the trope, if you will, it's there for a reason. It's a good building block to then springboard onto a larger story.
And by the way, so we went from village being burned to a friend
being kidnapped.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons that works, because there's that quote that's a kind of a disturbing quote, but one person dying is a tragedy. A million people dying is a statistic, right? The idea that if a whole village gets burned down, right? That's an awful thing that happened,
right?
But we don't have attachment to everyone in the village, right? Yeah. It's just a concept.
We are attached to the character that is mourning for the village, so we go,
exactly. So empathetically, we care about that,
right?
But if you have a specific person where we care not just about the person who cares for them, but we also care about the person ourselves, then if something happens to them, no, you can't have that.
It's very important, yeah. Sheedin18, thank you so much for the Twitch, the Twitch sub for tier 1. Since it's the 7th month, let's talk Final Fantasy VII. I know it's not anime, but is Cloud qualify as one? I think so. So I know a bare minimum about Cloud, and he is
too much for
very much a reluctant protagonist. I don't know what his moment is.
Right.
I just know the bare minimum about his character and that he's kind of a guts blonde boy, And where he's like, I'm too cool to go and deal with your little revolutionary group. I wish I could, but my life is pain and so I don't know much about Cloud as a character, but yeah, I would say that yes, he definitely fits that role. I just don't know what his moment was.
Would the moment in Final Fantasy VII count as the choosing moment?
I don't know anything about the stories.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
I got.
But
the next one I wanted to bring up in terms of shonen protagonists, where very early on, this is another thing we're going to get at a little bit, is that a lot of these stories where you have a character that has a drive and a singular, simple goal, you kind of have to end their reluctance rather quickly so that they're not constantly their own worst enemy with regards to going after their goal.
Sure.
Hajime no Ippo does this rather well with their main character, who is kind of the better iteration, in my opinion, of the Shinji Ikari, kind of the, oh no, I don't want to do the thing, I'm getting bullied. And it's like, yeah, I get it. You're being bullied for sure. But he has his moment very early on in the show.
And in some ways, it is kind of a forced moment in that it's a serendipitous moment,
well,
right?
It's not his choice, no.
Right. But then suddenly, very quickly, sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah. The moment as to when it happens and he realizes he's going to take an active role in this thing called boxing, is not because the environment was entirely conspiring against him. The environment in this case actually kind of came to him and pulled him out of this. Didn't do it all for him, and basically Takamura shows up and basically, just dodges his ways, like, miss me with that stupid shit, and then gives Ippo basically a picture, a vision as to what it would look like if you were a proactive protagonist.
Yep.
And Ippo has this, like, oh, okay, so I could do this.
Yep.
I don't know if I could do this. And then, Takamura then basically lets him slowly prove himself by giving him little tests, like this, like the moment with the tree.
And in a lot of ways, I feel like each one of those early on is kind of Ippo deciding, right? Because it was something that he was tentatively kind of going after. Like he goes after it with dedication, but it's something where it's like he's not really sure. There's that kernel of hope and belief in there, but it's not strong, right? And then as it keeps going, he's like, no, I think, I would really love to do this. Yeah, I'm going to do this, and then he turns into the person that we have where we're at in the show right now.
Yeah. It's got some stuff coming in here. This is one from Wise Casual. Jacob, what about Joel from The Last of Us?
So yeah, we on the list of like Western, stories and stuff, The Last of Us is one of them, and Caleb hasn't played the game,
right?
So I don't want to spoil anything or whatever, but yes, The Last of Us, Joel, enough said. Like, if you have played the game or seen the playthroughs, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Okay.
It is a fantastic example of forced end choice, right? Forced and eventual choice. And it's just, I love it so much. If you haven't played The Last of Us, go play it. Or watch the playthroughs. It's wonderful.
Behanor, Geralt of Rivia is the grizzled warrior archetype within regards to this. So there is an aspect of him that's the reluctant protagonist. But he is not... It's more of a video game logic that makes him the protagonist. But a lot of what sets him up in the story as the protagonist is that he takes an active role based on the requests of those people that he is in relationship with. So for him, it's not as defined as having a moment of something that shifts him into being a reluctant... like something other than a reluctant protagonist. But he does have a lot of tugs and pulls in the environment from the people that he's close to and stuff. So it kind of fits, but I wouldn't really put him in this discussion, if that makes sense. How is Hohenheim not mentioned yet? Hohenheim, I would say, is one of those characters where his whole thing doesn't really get as much focus, I would say, from his perspective.
I would say we get good focus on the forced decision, right?
Yes.
Where he is put into a situation where he has to do this, right?
Right.
But a lot of his decisions in Brotherhood is specifically because there's this responsibility that he did kind of play a part, so he has to, but we don't see that moment where he goes from, no, I don't want to deal with it, to, yes, I'm going to, right?
Right.
Like once he got the forced decision, there didn't seem to be very much reluctance about it.
Right. Yeah.
Canute. Ooh.
Canute.
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to hold off on any... I saw a lot of people mentioning Canute, and I kind of want to hold off on Canute a little bit, because there's something that relates to Canute specifically that I'm kind of wanting to save a little bit in terms of the discussion once we've gone through a bunch of these other characters, because I want to show you guys a little bit of how certain forced moments... forced, I would say, environments lead to... the slow burn, kind of like Zuko, but in a different sense.
Okay.
To them being a really active part of the story. In one of, I would say to a lot of people, an anime that they've heard tons about, and it's like, okay, it's great, but now that it's been, how would I say, ripped off to death since then, it's kind of hard to look at it as the... in my opinion, just masterpiece that it is, and that's Madoka Magica.
Oh.
And the reason why I kind of wanted to hold off on Canute a little bit as well is because there's an aspect of spoilers with regards to these characters that is Very important if we're going to be discussing these characters.
Whereas for Madoka Magica, it's like, it's literally what the whole show revolves around very clearly.
Well, right, but the fact that it happens and the details of how it happens.
Oh, yeah, we don't have to go into that.
Well, I kind of want to a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Just to get at why it's so good.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. Madoka Magica has an environment in the story upon which the main character is constantly pushed at to become a magical girl.
Right.
Because if you're going to be an active protagonist in this story, you must be a magical girl.
Yep.
Well, this story really, really, really does a good job of pushing her to become that.
Yeah.
And I mean, it punishes her for taking so long to make the decision.
Right.
Over and over and over
again. In a lot of ways, the fact that she doesn't, like, it was everything in the show sets it up for it to be a perfect forced decision that maybe she can make a true decision on later, but she doesn't, right? That's like, in some ways, that's part of her inner true decision, is that she holds off, right? She holds off until she actively makes the decision, not just in some responsive thing.
Right. And specifically for Madoka, when she has her big moment, it is combined with another character's really kind of powerful moment of the choices that they've been making, or the environment that they've been preparing to keep the forced environment from making her make the choice.
Which is as far as character motivations, to basically make it so that I don't want you to ever have to make a forced decision.
Right.
Like, that's wonderful. I love it.
This is kind of the moment in the anime where you have the big sad. This is where you will cry. Like, it is so good in how it's set up. But I want to talk about it because there is a lot coming into the story where you're like, I want her to make this choice and have it be her own.
Right.
But even the actions of the person trying to help keep her from making the choice when it's not her own choice actively still ends up pushing her to make the choice. And to where I still don't know fully if I can definitively say that it was entirely Madoka's choice when she decides to do this. It was for the most part, I would say, but there's a lot that leads up to it. And that had to weigh on her as a character. So for Canute. Ooh.
Do you need a little bit more time to think about
I'm going to brew a little bit on Canute, so go for it.
So thanks, YX Casual. That's a great one to bring up. So, and I can't believe I forgot about this trope, but the fish out of water is another great example of where that archetype can be used for the reluctant hero.
Okay.
Rock from Black Lagoon is another example. Now, Rock's reluctance, for the most part, is only in like the first episode or so, and then he gets over that reluctance and he starts to contribute and whatnot. But because of the nature of what he's getting into, he's still it's not quite it is a forced decision, but
it's more than a hostile environment.
Right. Well, yeah. So I would still classify that as a forced decision, but in addition to being a forced decision, it's not a decision that he's really has both eyes open about. Right. Because as a result of that decision, there's other things that come up where it's like, so you're choosing to be a part of this dark world of modern day pirates and stuff. What about when they have to do things that are absolutely deplorable? Are you just going to go along with that? Like, what are you going to do, right? And that's a way to show that his reluctance is kind of still there, and then he has to continually make those active decisions, and that's one of the reasons why I loved Black Lagoon, is because they could do that from, like, 2 or 3 episode arc to arc, But unfortunately, as it went on, that happened less and less. So, yeah. And that's why I hate Roberto's Blood Trail, because he wasn't reluctant in that one, because it was just a flip on a dime thing and it was stupid. But anyways, Canute.
That's awesome. So Canute is in this unique instance there where the story of Vinland Saga, at least in season 1, is very much one where Canute is not a huge focus of the story from his perspective on things. There are a lot of instances there where we see him in a naive, passive submissive role.
Yeah.
And in that respect, there is a reluctance to be the prince, to be the leader that he is meant to be. There is an aspect of where the environment rips apart a lot of his reasons for being a passive, naive, submissive character. However, it's a conversation that is kind of his big moment in which he does abruptly shift focus. He literally like flows his cape to the side. Yeah, it's a beautiful scene. In fact, I would say Vinland Saga is at its best, weirdly enough, when its characters are just talking.
Yeah. Like, the fights with the Vikings and everything is wonderful.
They're awesome.
Thorkel is my bae. But, I can't believe I used that word. But the conversations are where it's really at.
Right. I would say that Canute does have a definitive moment where he redesigns his own philosophy based around his life experience thus far. Now, what's very fascinating about this is that I would say that I wouldn't have classified him as a reluctant protagonist. Because there was nothing about his character that had specific goals or any kind of thing that was pushing him in a specific direction. If anything, he was reluctant as a character in that he was being pushed towards this specific role eventually by characters like Askeladd. And in some ways, even his father.
Yeah.
But it's characters that don't end up having that kind of aspect for him, where they kind of fulfill the, almost in some ways, the spiritual angle for his whole journey in Ragnar and then the priest.
Yep.
When those characters kind of have their moments of talk and discussion with Canute, we start to see more of the protagonist, if you will, of Canute come out.
Right.
And when he has his moment before he comes and takes command of everyone, basically, we got to see the capitulation of all that build up to there. But yeah, I would say he's definitely one of those characters that has a well-deserved moment when he switches up his reluctance for something else.
And it is crystal clear.
It is like, so clear.
Like a lot of the times when there's the reluctant protagonist, and this is where I feel like they usually do badly, is there isn't a clearly defined moment where they actually choose. Worse is if they're not clearly defined, if they never actually actively choose at all, right?
Right.
If it's something where they're constantly kind of being railroaded. And that's why in D&D I hate railroads. But in any kind of long-term thing. But if you can have that crystal clear moment, then it's okay.
Okay, go for it. Yeah.
So, love it or hate it, an example of the powerful effect of these moments, if they are crystal clear, even if they're backpedaled on immediately after, is Let It Go. Elsa's whole Let It Go sequence in Frozen. The entire popularity of the movie, or like not entirely, but a good portion of it was because of that sequence, right?
All right.
And people would hear that sequence all the time. It drove them crazy. And it was backpedaled right after. But on its own, Disney at the very least understood the potential power that scene could have on people. And it apparently did.
Right. But unfortunately, like, Frozen as a story, you could tell which parts had been rewritten and changed and swapped around to where it...
Backpedaled on immediately after. But,
yeah. So there's that. The one character that I was realizing we kind of had built up a bunch, but we hadn't actually talked about here is, now let's bring him up, y'all. Shinji Ikari.
Yeah.
Shinji Ikari is, in my opinion, one of the most important reluctant protagonists in anime ever. And I would say that to an extreme, yeah. Like, there's a specific reason why his character needs to exist. Like, not only needs to exist, but needs to be lauded and both praised. And like, I feel like as a character, he comes so close to almost being a subversion of the trope of a reluctant protagonist.
I would say so too. Yeah. Well, because sorry, did you have something?
Just go.
Okay.
Go. Fine.
Well, so you know how I said that like it's important to have like a crystal clear moment where they actually like have to choose, right? Shinji is never in that. He's perpetually reluctant. the entire time, and that's kind of the focus. Even when he is forced to do things, oftentimes he goes against that specifically.
Right. Well, the thing about him is that there's a lot of times where you try to make characters relatable, but there's other times where you just make a character realistic.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that's kind of fun about entertainment is that we don't go to entertainment all the times for realism. We go to entertainment specifically for the escape. Mm-hmm. However, the protagonist that's tasked with saving the world at age 15 and get in the damn robot and fight the super ridiculous aliens from interdimensional whatevers.
Yep.
It's going to break your kid. Mm-hmm. And also when you have the worst father, debatably one of the worst fathers in the history of anime fathers, it just gets a bit worse and worse. And then you surround him with a bunch of other broken peers as well with their own, issues and stuff. I like that he actually has tons of little moments where you're like, he's got it. He's got it. Oh, no, I do. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because most people, we don't have like a definitive moment.
Right. If only life was that simple.
If only life was that simple. If only we could just decide, I am going to work out consistently. Because it's in my character motivation.
Right.
Ba-bam! Explosions, colors, slow motion.
That's not
Dempsey roll intensifies. No, it doesn't work like that. It just doesn't work like that. You have to keep making decisions over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important that we have a protagonist like Shinji Ikari where it's like, he does have a bunch of little moments. Mm-hmm. But you could also look at those and go, none of those are like the moments we mentioned previously.
Right.
None of them have that same resounding impact. I mean, maybe there are some where they have a lot of the emotional buildup because we've followed with his journey on an emotional level so much.
But it's not like this is the pivot point where everything is different from there on after.
Right.
Like, as much as Asuka's introduction does change a lot of things, right?
Sure, just a little bit.
It's not a complete shift for Shinji in a permanent way, right? Mm-hmm. Because people are fluid and constantly changing.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. A Cap 22 Mob might be a good example, and I feel like his specific moment happened in the second half of season 2, either the Reagan arc or the final arc. Well, the tricky thing with Mob, I would say specifically, is that his main growth, I would say, comes about in the form of relationships. Like his best forms of growth, I would say, comes about with his friendships, his relationship with Reagan, his connection to those people. And I would say it's that bit where you have the environment forcing you into specific things, and then you realize, wait, I'm a powerful person. I have the capacity to make choices. I can say no to people. I think that Mob is a great example of that. But part of the thing that I would say makes him also a little bit on the realistic side of things, like we were talking about with Shinji, is that his big moment isn't something that comes as a great departure. It's a little bit more gradual. The Reagan arc is, I would say, a great focus on it. But again, if we're talking about Mob, the focus on Mob is actually quite minimal during that bit there.
Right. Like, I feel like... Because, okay, when he goes to Reagan, it is out of kind of his reluctance about his situation. I have these psychic powers. What do I do with them, right? He wants guidance. And then as Reagan starts to give him guidance, he very readily accepts it. Like, he's hungry for it. And every little tidbit, even though Reagan isn't a psychic and he's a con man and all that stuff, to Mob, they're nuggets of pure gold, right? And he treasures them. And he builds his whole life around them. And so it's like, yes, he's reluctant, and yet he doesn't really have the super defining moments, really, unless, I don't know, like, because he's both reluctant and not, because he's so hungry for what Reagan gives him.
Yeah, in that respect, someone was mentioning up there that Mob as a show or a character is about becoming more independent, and I would say that is kind of the aspect of the Reagan arc, specifically, but if anything, Mob becomes a little bit more about self-assuredness and maybe about confidence, because it's about using your power in a story where he's been constantly told, don't use your power. I would say it's, prohibition, kind of being forced down to don't do anything versus making active choices in general that have to do with you. And independency, I'd see as more of something where it's like, how much do you define yourself around those connections? And yet, Mob is more seeking interdependency, where he has some kind of identity in those connections. There's a lot of value he places within them, and thus he ends up kind of drawing himself closer to some, farther away from others, and relying on them in certain instances. Not like the season 2 finale where he's like, I've got this whole thing myself, and yet he still ends up actually needing a couple other people in the instances before that. So that's an interesting one. Killua, I see some people mentioning Killua. I don't think Killua's a reluctant protagonist.
No, he has his struggles that he needs to overcome, but I don't feel like he's ever really internally divided onto whether to overcome the struggles. It's more of whether he's going to include his friends in those struggles.
Right. I think, if anything, Killua has a lot of moments where he allows fear to overwhelm him with regards to being able to make decisions and be active.
Sure.
But it's so much on the lines of being literally incapable of doing it. And there's a really powerful moment, yes, in him removing the needle, and that was a really cool moment. And he is definitively different, I would say, after that. But the build up to the moment of removing the needle wasn't really one that I felt like was based around the character growth as much. It's a little bit more complicated.
And maybe that was because it had like a technical aspect of that the needle was actually doing something literally to him. You know? Mm-hmm. But even then, it was something where it seemed more like he was hyper cautious. Like, than not wanting to do things in general. Mm-hmm. Oh, Jacuzzi Splot.
Jacuzzi Splot. Okay, so Jacuzzi Splot, unfortunately, isn't a non-linear storytelling show. So there's a little bit of tricky instances with understanding where his development actually happens. Because it's not really that he changes.
No,
he's always been this type of character.
He has made the decision to be the reluctant and the protagonist at the same time.
Right.
In this quantum superposition duality where he's
constantly crying.
He's constantly crying, and he's constantly terrified,
and he's gonna kick your ass as he's constantly crying.
Yeah.
I would say Jacuzzi Splot is Jacuzzi Splot is a character from Bacano with a really unfortunate name, just in general. But I think his name is wonderful, but to any girls, it's like, my name is Jacuzzi Splot, and it's like, oh, I'm sorry. That just sounds disgusting. And it's like, yep, I know. I still hate my parents to this day. You know? Like that's the kind of character he is. Where, as a character in the story of Bacano, there's very little moments where you get linear progression from his character. There is a specific moment in the story where you are revealed that he's actually fully capable of just full-on mob warfare.
Right.
He is not a coward.
Right.
If anything, he is definitely a scaredy cat towards the idea of violence.
And he accepts that part of himself in order to... Yeah.
Right. It almost channels him to go forward.
Right.
But he maybe has a little bit of a moment with Lad. And, sorry, not Lad, the rail tracer on top of the train. And we kind of mentioned that in a previous podcast. But I still wouldn't put him fully in this bit here because he doesn't get enough, I would say, character internal focus to justify it.
Now, what about Tenma? Because for Tenma, he's definitely a reluctant protagonist at the beginning,
right?
But does he have a moment where he actively chooses? Because I almost feel like that's the whole point of the show.
When he meets Johan. When he meets Johan in the parking garage.
Yes.
Yeah. I would say that Johan and Tenma complete this package together.
Okay.
Because Tenma starts off in an oppressive environment where the hospital is using their political, mumbo jumbo kind of movements and stuff to basically keep him clamped down. There is I will not spoil too much of Monster here, but there is a set of moments that happen very quickly in the show with regards to things happening in the hospital where it swiftly changes in terms of circumstances. And I think in some ways he is forced even more so into an environmental state that leaves less choice in his mind, at least, as to what he needs to do. But there is a specific moment where he is confronted with something, i.e. Johann in this case, and he kind of has the moment of, I have to fix this.
Right. And how is he going to fix this? Because I feel like he then makes the conscious decision of, I'm going to fix this. But then there's this other question of, what kind of protagonist am I going to be? And there's the one that he thinks he's being forced to be.
Right.
Right. And he doesn't want to be that. And it creates a ton of conflict over the course of the story. And the way it's resolved is quite satisfying.
Yeah. He doesn't have, though, I would say, a fully entirely defining moment that shifts him completely in terms of character, though.
Right.
He is always somewhat the reluctant protagonist because of his promise to do no harm as a doctor.
Maybe it's at when he finally makes a decision at the end of the story. Maybe that could be considered like that, like when he decides what to do, you know?
Zebedee Charles saying, I think his moment is in the library, honestly. Okay. That's part of it, because he's literally like setting up the tool of his
right. It's he is
choice.
He is dealing with the decision very concretely.
Right. He decides to fix it, but he is always reluctant to execute the necessary actions. Yeah, that's a good simple way of putting it, because it does come down to a lot of moments where he chokes because he hasn't fully changed as a person yet.
Yep.
And I would say that's part of the strength of his character, is that he tries to hold both aspects of this in tandem.
Right. Yeah.
And it doesn't work all the time.
Nope.
It really doesn't work all the time. We get to see how the story ends, and it ends, I'd say, it ends in a way that I would say is both brilliant and also kind of trying to not choose one way or the other a little bit. So there's some interesting aspects to that there to explore. But I would say,
and the whole question of how well it works.
And the question of how well it works. Yeah, I would say it works really well for Johann, specifically with what they do with his character as a developing kind of force there. But yeah, for Tenma, it isn't as powerful, right? Potentially, but
still a great character.
Still a great character, though. Yeah. Usopp. Okay, I don't know.
think so. No,
I don't know about Usopp. No,
like because he's definitely an underdog, but underdog and reluctant protagonists are
not the
different.
Same thing.
And he is very gung ho. He will go and fight people. Definitely that he has no hope of beating, right, because that's what he's about. You know, now he struggles with it sometimes. He gets worn down because of it and whatnot, but that's still a very prominent thing.
Yeah, the way we would basically describe the reluctant protagonist is basically the character that is forced to do something until they have no choice but to do that thing. And then at a later point in the story, they then realize that they've been... that's a reluctant protagonist, just in general. But then the characters that we're specifically wanting to talk about here are those reluctant protagonists where they have that moment where things shift in a tangible, near-permanent kind of way. It doesn't have to be entirely permanent. In fact, in some ways, it's better if it's not permanent.
Sure, Nami's a great example, Yeah.
Because Nami might be better,
because she doesn't like the whole Arlong Park arc, right? Like she doesn't want to be helping Arlong, right? But she feels like she's kind of forced to, and she does choose it in a way, right? But it's a forced thing. And then eventually, like my favorite moment of, Luffy, help, right? That's where she's finally making a conscious decision, a free decision of
I want
please
Nakama.
Come help me. I can't do this on my own.
Right. Oh, that's good. Nami is a great example of this, because not only does it then fundamentally change, or no, does it fundamentally disagree with an aspect of who she was beforehand, and that she cares only about money in this case here, which obviously wasn't the case. She cares a lot about other things as well. But she was willing to be vulnerable and let other people in on her struggle, which she was doing solely by herself.
Yep.
So when she asks for help, it is the boiled down, crystallized, fine, just just
turn
perfect.
The page and there's an ode to cry, right?
Yep.
And suddenly, Okay, waiver from Fate Zero. I don't think I would underdog definitely, but I don't know if I would classify him as a reluctant hero, because so he learns the proper reasons kind of why to do what he's doing, but he was still wanting to do the thing.
Here's an example of something that I think is really good to bring up, is that a character being scared in the story, a character who has an aspect of them that is they feel inferior about themselves in some way. So when they have their inferiority in conflict with their goal, you'd think, reluctant hero.
Right.
But no, I would say, if anything, what about Waver's environment forces him to enter the Holy Grail War?
He actually proactively does it as a way to try and spite the professor guy.
Exactly.
You know? Like because any, like, hopefully, you know, a character, when they're in a point of conflict, there will be some internal reluctance when they're actually in the act of doing it, because they might be scared or whatever. That helps make them human.
Yeah.
But with the reluctant hero, it's something where they actually are given the decision and then they decide against it, right? Mm-hmm. And that's something that might be even continuing until they finally change their mind or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, would Kotomi Nakire in Zero be considered a reluctant villain? Kind of. Yeah.
What's forcing him into villainy?
Okay, that's a good... Well,
yeah, no, I don't think so. Because it's tricky, though, because
he does have a crystal moment, right?
There is a crystal moment where he decides who he's going to be.
Mm-hmm. And he was reluctant very much up until that point.
But I would say, if anything, he was more... He wasn't forced, he was seduced. It's kind of something where, in some ways... I'm memeing hard here, but Gilgamesh full on like seduced this guy into villainy.
Maybe,
and it's not just his sexy bod. Like it was the act of being free to act as a king, to do what you want and act on your whims and your impulses with just the confidence and knowledge that you have the will to make this choice. Therefore, it makes it right. And that is kind of what Gilgamesh operates on. So I'd say, if anything, he's not really a reluctant villain either.
What if it was something where he was a reluctant character, and when he had his moment, he chose to be a villain? Because he was forced to do the things that he did because he was a part of the church, right? You know, people told him to do things, so he did it, right?
Right.
You know, he followed orders. And then that's sort of how he becomes that reluctant, or... Well, yeah, reluctant character that ends up going on a journey, and his decision is to go bad.
Yeah. Zenitsu. So there are a lot of anime characters that have the, I would say, kind of the Zenitsu, Armin, like, what are some of those other characters? Where
Jean, actually, from Attack on Titan was another one.
No. I'm talking about the Armin Zenitsu type character.
Oh, like the super, like, no backbone, like, scared, all that stuff?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So... I would say, actually, that the biggest thing about those characters is that they're always going to have their moment where they tap into who they are.
Sure.
But they're usually not as much forced into this situation. There are things in which they stumble into a situation. The situation happens to them, like a Titan's breaking through the walls for Armin, specifically. But he actually gets to have the privilege, in a lot of ways, of being able to stay behind, be able to be behind all this craziness happening. And he's never really forced to make a single choice there.
Right. He kind of goes along with the crowd of Eren and Mikasa of going into the military. I mean, if he did have a moment, it would be when he makes his speech to the soldiers.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Like
Armin and Zenitsu have very clear moments, for sure.
And Zenitsu can just go wake up from being asleep and sort of, undo his moment.
Right. I love Armin's moment. You just called it out, and that was a really good one. Is the moment, where he leaves the cover of the Titan skeleton. And that was just... Oh, it was so powerful to hear for the first time. It was a really good moment. I saw someone mention the quintessential reluctant protagonist in Western film, especially more recently, given that he's being redone over and over and over again here, and that's Spider-Man, actually. Spider-Man is kind of the quintessential underdog, reluctant protagonist, coming-of-age story. He kind of has the whole package rolled into one. And I think that's why he is the kind of the favorite superhero for a lot of young people specifically. But I wouldn't really go into him as this character here, because his moment is one that is we all know what the moment is, but it's something where he's not really choosing as much there.
Well,
it's that his choice from beforehand led to Mr. Great Power Comes Great Responsibility no longer being able to say, great power comes great responsibility.
Well, and maybe it's that what if it was that the forced decision, right, that comes as a result of, Uncle Ben, right? 'Cause we all know that one. Then the question, and probably one of the things that dictates how well received the Spider-Man adaptation will be is how the true choice comes after that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Like in the
second Spider-Man movie.
Yeah, in Spider-Man 2, that was really good. Like it all revolved around, okay, you can freely choose now. What are you going to choose? Right?
And it's a constant thing throughout the movie as the environment just basically beats him with a baseball bat constantly and going like, hey, give up. You only have one choice. And then he eventually gives up so that when he comes back, even though it's kind of the cheesy, like, yeah, I'm going to do it. I get a speech from Aunt May. I still love that speech from Aunt May wonderfully.
Great.
But as far as the movie, because I don't know much about comic Spider-Man, as far as that movie goes, I loved his decision to come back. It felt really good.
Oh, yeah.
Even for superhero movies way back when. That was...
And if you've seen Into the Spider-Verse, that is an amazing other example of the reluctant hero where there's a forced decision. There is a very clear forced decision early on, and then there's a very clear moment. And it is a moment. It's like, yeah, let's get some music in here. Let's make this a visual spectacle.
What's up, Danger?
Like, what's up, Danger? Yeah.
Oh my God.
Falling up like, oh hell yes.
That scene was one of the best moments of my like cinema entertainment experience of life. Like, I will put that up there as like top 25 moments of like staring at a TV and being like, I was made for this. Like this, I'm so glad to be alive right now. This is wonderful. Oh my God. Amidju, not anime, also not entirely heroic, but Michael Corleone.
Oh yeah.
Wait, hold on. Let me bring this back up here. From The Godfather, works excellently as a reluctant protagonist.
Right. Yeah. And the reluctant protagonist thing is like throughout like Western media.
For sure.
It's almost just incredibly difficult to avoid. You almost can't avoid it, especially with like the older classics. And yeah, he very, very definitively has the points where he's forced into it, and then has the points where he goes back in and chooses it.
I would say this is kind of the we're just kind of repeating and talking with you guys about specific characters that have kind of the fit for this this specific mold that we're looking for here. But I would say that one of the things to kind of close off the podcast because this is kind of more of a shorter podcast in general, but something to close this off here is that there's a lot of characters where when they have their moment specifically, the moment ends up being really powerful. But because you kind of got that time to give them the moment, you don't necessarily have any like kind of lingering perspective on the character's then internal state regarding the conflict that they supposedly completely resolved in the moment. And I'm going to mention one character here that was briefly brought up, but not actually gone in depth into.
Yeah.
In that has a very powerful moment, but kind of has this lingering feeling throughout it where, no, this is now the beginning of their journey to kind of shifting their focus on this. And that's a character called Shoto Todoroki from My Hero Academia.
Oh, yeah.
So I remember...
talked about it ever, but...
We did. But I wanted to bring up Shoto because his moment kind of covers over the course of the beginning of season 2. In 210, it's more that Deku finally reached him. He finally was able to have his words hit him. And this is something that, at least as far as our channel goes, was one of the episodes where we went so like crazy in the discussion and ended up getting a lot out of it. But there were a lot of moments after this big moment in the show where you realize he's not fully through this.
Right.
He's started a process, and the process is hard, But the thing is that in some ways, because of the style of show MHA is, they can't really show his process.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as entertaining for the target audience, basically.
And he's not the main character.
So I would love to see more in storytelling parts where you have the big moment for a character, and then they wrestle with the fact that they are currently tearing themselves apart and breaking themselves down to their components and rebuilding something new. And that's difficult. I think in some ways this is what separates Shinji from a lot of the other reluctant protagonists, in that he kind of remains reluctant and has little moments here and there, but he doesn't fully ever completely change. He is still wrestling with that internal, force inside him, that fear. There are a lot of characters out there where when you go through that building block process of rebuilding and switching up things, you're going to meet resistance from you. Like, you are going to be the biggest problem in that. And I would like to see some really cool kind of focuses on that in
Todoroki?
In stories.
I
think that Todoroki basically shows the beginning point.
Right.
Where you can basically show that, there's moments like when Endeavor is getting his development that he's like still dealing with this and stuff. But yeah.
Because that's basically the season 2 of Zuko, right? Like that's where we got to see, like, one of the reasons why season 2 is my favorite, other than just the episodes generally being a little bit better than the other seasons on average, is those Zuko alone moments, those moments where we can see him actively wrestling with it. And it's not just, yes, he's had his points, but he's also building up to those points. He's getting ready for it. He's actively going in and churning up his inner self and figuring out who he is and what he's going to do, right? Whether it's before the moment or after, both work, because, for a truly crystal clear moment, it's the sum of all the little moments before. And then if you have a crystal clear moment like with Todoroki, it's going to need to have all that follow-up afterwards in order to make sure that it stays crystal.
For sure. And I would love to see that in the reluctant protagonist, reluctant hero archetype trope, is have those moments kind of following afterwards be a huge portion of the story's actual development. In some ways, this might be the limitation of the medium. I think maybe in some ways for this specific archetype, it might be interesting to see how books specifically tackle it, or in anime you could look for like light novels and stuff in general, where there is a lot more first-person focus, way more internal thoughts going on here and there, and then they get to wrestle with the actual, repercussions of their whole self changing, in a way like that. Kota from MHA when he used his quirk versus muscular.
Sure, I would say that's still in kind of a situation where it's a bit close to being a forced decision, because while he still made that decision, it was in such dire circumstances. Like, I'd want to see how he followed up on that decision when it's not dire circumstances, right? What does he actively choose when there's nothing else?
Yomri, thank you so much for the Twitch Prime for 11 months. Thank you so much. Okay, I think that's basically it for now. But y'all, thank you so much for giving us a lot of feedback regarding which other kind of reluctant protagonists, reluctant heroes out there that you think we should give kind of a little bit of a discussion on. What is your favorite one, though? Your absolute favorite reluctant character protagonist in anime, specifically in anime.
Because we know if it wasn't anime, it would be Mercury from Battle Lines. The main character in my sci-fi novel Battle Lines is definitely a reluctant protagonist. Link in chat to Amazon where you can purchase it.
Wait, Stewball is saying, no, wait, I never got to ask my irrelevant question.
Nice.
I can't tell if that's literal or not, but yeah. Shinpachi, wait, what? Okay. Hey, Rose just got here. What is this stream about? Oh, it's a great stream, Setafi Senpai. It's kind of ending now because we're doing a little bit of a shorter one, but is about reluctant protagonists or reluctant heroes and their moments that they have that shift them as a character. Tsukishima, yeah, okay.
Ray from March Comes in Like a Lion. I debated putting him on the list. Yeah,
he's a little bit more complicated than that,
because he's both forced into it in a lot of points, but then there's a lot of points where he chooses it. But it's a slow burn. It's a growth, not like a specific turning point.
Yeah, Ray is a fantastic character.
Yeah.
Depends on how you define reluctance. I think Rurouni Kenshin is an entire story about it of sorts. His life of battle as one sworn to no longer take life.
Oh,
okay. A stream about Shinji getting in the robot. It's not entirely wrong. That's kind of true. Yeah. I like a lot of these characters. Okay. You like classical anti-heroes. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, hey, Jack Sparrow. That's another like popular example where
he's kind of the anti-hero.
Yeah, he is very much the anti-hero, but it also kind of goes into the reluctant hero at some points. Well, eventually, but not as much early on.
Not as much early on. Yeah. And he doesn't. Yeah. I don't know who Hachiman is, but okay. Akira from Devilman. Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. For sure. I'm thinking about redemption and recovery stories for anti-heroes. Shield Hero comes to mind, but okay. Have you ever read Artemis Fowl?
I have not.
No, I've not, but I know plenty about it. Feels like the main character's journey to becoming a good guy is a good example. Okay.
Gotcha.
Okay, good to know. Okay. I think reluctance is one of those relatable tropes for audience. Yash, yep. That is primarily, unfortunately, the main reason I would say why reluctant hero archetypes are a mainstream thing, is it sells a lot better.
Oh no, but that's also where you get at some of the deepest stuff of humanity, because what good is the journey to becoming the mythic hero if you don't have to overcome those,
yes, I'm not saying that that's all a bad thing, but I'm saying that the primary reason as to why it is in the mainstream thing is because it sells better. It's more relatable. Relatability is like marketability. That is all I'm saying, basically. I'm not saying it's bad entirely.
Right, yeah. And in the bad examples of it, I would say it's definitely where it's done for the, okay, here's the token thing we do to sell stuff and whatnot, because this is supposed to work. Yeah.
Right, for sure. Shrek!
I mean...
That's not bad.
Yeah. Yeah. It is definitely.
What are you doing in my swamp?
Right, and there's the part where he's forced to go because he needs to get the things out of the swamp, and then there's the active free decision where he goes back for Fiona.
It works.
Yeah.
It works.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Yeah. That's a good one. Not bad, yeah.
And what's great about
Shrek
that
1 and 2 are just supremely good movies, though. That's just, yeah.
Well, and what I love about that in Shrek is because he actually gets the thing that he sets out to do from the forced decision.
Yes.
And then suddenly he's not being forced to do anything anymore. So it's not something where he has to oppose the forced decision. It runs its course. And then he realizes I'm a different person.
I don't want this anymore.
Yeah.
Like, this is not enough for me. Even though he kind of feels like he kind of has to be a tsundere and resist it when Donkey comes back and he's like, hey, call to action, hero. What are you doing? I can't do a Donkey impression.
And as far as moments, now granted, it wasn't the moment where he makes the decision, but it was the moment of the lead up to the decision of the Hallelujah song being used in there. That was
Yeah, but we do have to end the podcast here, y'all. But the Shrek one, that's a good.
That is a good
not
one.
A meme, not just a meme. Actually, good reluctant hero.
Yep.
But y'all, we've got our streams this week. Usual setup here.
Right.
I had a little bit of a ridiculously long stream on Friday. That is not necessarily happening on Friday this time, but all our streams are at 3 p.m. Pacific time, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Monday are for podcasts, Tuesday for One Piece manga readings. They're really fun. Thursday for Jacob Gaming, Friday for Caleb Gaming, and then back around, again for next week.
That's right.
But yeah, leave a follow if you want to stay up to date with all this stuff. Leave us your Twitch Prime stuff if you feel like Jeff Bezos could, give us some of his money. That'd be really cool. Or also you get a cool magnet badge and access to our private Discord where you can chat with us in the community about stories, anime, stuff, whatever. Jacob, you've already showed Battle Lines.
I've already showed Battle Lines, but if you need to get the link again, just type !BL in chat, and it will post a link.
He wrote and published a sci-fi novel. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah,
very tight, fun story. Go check it out.
Yeah.
And we'll see you all in the next one. But until then, we're Semblance of Sanity. I'm Caleb.
I'm Jacob.
And we'll see you all next time. Okay. BL, exactly. Blosaka.
Oh, yeah. Mercury, definitely. Reluctant protag. Ha!
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are you gaming right now?
Yakuza 0. Almost
0.
over. We had a frustrating bit with the disco because it was tough. It was really tough.
I'm finishing up Transistor on Friday. I might end up going directly from there into another game, but we'll see, because I did a lot of Transistor in one sitting.
And I do have my next game decided, even though I will be doing catch-up on Comey and Attack on Titan before then. So, yeah, but what is it? Not telling.
New game will eventually be told on a Thursday stream, so be there for that with Jacob.
Yeah.
That's going to be exciting. Very, very cool. I guess, do you want to say anything before we end the stream? Where we